From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
The House passes a spending bill to avoid a government shutdown at the end of the week. But with almost half of Republicans voting no, what does it say about new Speaker Mike Johnson's hold on the gavel? Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnist Kim Strassel and editorial board member Kate Batchelder Odell. November 17th is the latest deadline to prevent a government shutdown, but as of Tuesday night, one half of Congress had now passed a bill to kick that deadline into next year. Let's start with the new Speaker Mike Johnson making the argument that this is the right move for Republicans.
What we need to do is avoid the government shutdown. Why? Because that would unduly harm the American people. Troops wouldn't be paid. We know all the effects of that. And so we have to avoid that, and we have a responsibility to do it. But this allows, as was said, this allows us as conservatives to go into the fight on the next stages of this, to talk about real border changes, policies at the border, to close the southern border, to get it under control, to talk about the oversight that's necessary on additional Ukraine aid, to get Israel done if they don't do it as we beg them to do.
Now the bill goes over to the Senate, and here is the Republican leader there, Mitch McConnell, suggesting that it will not face a blockade there.
I think the Speaker has produced a solution for the CR that's clearly a step in the right direction. I intend to support it. I understand it's likely to clear the House on a bipartisan basis. It's nice to see us working together to prevent a government shutdown, and we'll deal with all of the other big issues that we have ahead of us during this period between now and the time the CR expires. So I'm happy for him and look forward to seeing it pass on a bipartisan basis.
Kim, the vote in the House was 336 to 95. And it had to pass a 2/3 bar because it was being considered under a suspension of rules. But in the end, 209 Democrats voted yes, and only 127 Republicans. So, Kim, what is in this spending resolution? What is the cause of that Republican dissent? And do you think that it is a threat to Speaker Mike Johnson's hold on the gavel?
Let's remember the history here and the dynamics. So the background is that for years and years, Congress has blown off its duties to pass annual appropriations bills. Under the law, they are supposed to pass 12 different spending bills funding different parts of government by September 30th. They never hit that. And instead, what happens is you get these big blowout spending bills at the end of the year under some sort of deadline where nobody's paying any attention. The House Republicans, to their credit, when they took back over, said, we want to go back to regular order, do this the right way. The problem is that neither the House nor the Senate has yet passed all of the bills they need to pass and gone to conference to come up with a solution. So we've been operating under a continuing resolution that took us beyond that September 30th deadline. That is set to expire Friday night at midnight. And here's the problem Mike Johnson faced, is that he's right that a shutdown would be bad. Troops wouldn't be paid. The administration would make it as painful as possible on people, and Republicans would be blamed. What they need is more time to work through these bills and to go to conference and work through them with the Senate. His problem is that a whole bunch on the right have been wanting him to use a CR as essentially hostage taking and say, we're not going to continue to fund the government unless we get more of what we want. He was in the same situation that Kevin McCarthy was in at the end of September when faced with a similar choice. He was lucky this time because while he was forced to go to Democrats to get the number of votes to pass this, it doesn't look as though the conservative part of his caucus is going to punish him by doing what they did to Kevin McCarthy and trying to remove him from his speakership. As you know, Kyle, there were only 127 Republicans who voted for this versus 209 Democrats. It was carried mostly with Democrats. That was because, again, the right in his party keeps insisting that these continuing resolutions need to require more spending cuts and more border protections. But the votes for that aren't there in the caucus either. And even the right wing wasn't showing up for some of those votes when Kevin McCarthy tried it. So he basically was dealt a poor hand, much as his predecessor. And he seems to have gotten away with it because, for now at least, the Republicans seem to not have the appetite to go through another whole speaker fight.
But it seems to me that Speaker Johnson has been dealt the same set of cards as Kevin McCarthy, and he's now making the same sorts of choices with the same sorts of results. And just recall that there was a continuing resolution back in September that was discussed that did include some cuts. According to one report and roll call, it would be about an 8% cut to non-defense, non-veteran spending. And that couldn't pass the House either. So the choice that these guys are giving the speaker, whoever is sitting in that spot, is to get with Democrats and pass something that has no cuts or shut down the government. And it's notable to see some of the responses, I think, from the right to this move by Speaker Johnson. So the Freedom Caucus said that it contains no spending reductions, no border security, and not a single meaningful win for the American people. Republicans must stop negotiating against ourselves over fears of what the Senate may do with the promised rollover today and will fight tomorrow. And this was Texas Congressman Chip Roy. He said, if you're storming the beaches of Normandy and the commanding officer goes down and somebody else takes over, you don't say, oh, well, you get a honeymoon period. You got to pick it up and go. And so he was criticizing the Speaker of the House there. But Kate, what I find so frustrating about this conversation that we keep going in circles on, I feel like, is if Republicans could stick together, they could get something. If you have Republicans all on board to pass some kind of continuing resolution with a 1 or a 2 or a 3% spending cut, pick a number, then you could get that bill passed through the House, send it over to the Senate, and begin the process of negotiation. But because of this narrow majority, and because you have these holdouts for whom even an 8% cut doesn't seem to be enough, instead of getting something, Republicans end up getting nothing.
If we're going to keep the Normandy metaphor going, perhaps another bad strategy for storming the beaches is to have half a dozen people yelling, I think we should try something else. And that there is some element here. That's what's been going on, and an inability to pull in the same direction. So that's what you're describing there, and rejecting that 8% cut and then forcing Johnson to rely on the Democrats to get this through. I'd also add, they lost weeks in the meantime of terrible press coverage of their infighting, of an inability to come up with a candidate, of going through Scalise and Jordan and infighting over that, all time that could have been spent trying to pass appropriations bills to at least try to have some leverage with the Senate in these negotiations, but none of that happened. And so I think that is another factor in why you have this weaker speaker left with a bad hand and a 4-vote majority, that this is a concession to political reality. This is what he had to do to keep the government open. I'd also add, you described it well, that first you reject everything and then you leave the option of Democrats or shutdown. But I'm also not clear on how Republicans could leverage a shutdown into a victory for them. It would be very painful. The coverage of it would blame Republicans. Federal government could choose to shut down parts of the government that people actually like parks. That has never proved to be a real winner for Republicans and in general. And keep in mind, too, at least other shutdowns were ostensibly organized around something, even if it wasn't achievable. Here, there's none of that. There's nothing that, no one priority, no conservative priority here that seems like it will satiate the people who are voting against them. So my question is, what comes after this in January and February?
But the fact that we're talking about January and February and giving some time for the regular appropriations process to play out, I think is still a change from previous years. And Speaker Johnson can maybe say a victory in that there will be no Christmas omnibus spending bill that gets dropped with little time to read it, hundreds, thousands of pages, and who knows what gets stuffed in there. And then they have to, under the gun, under the deadline, get it passed in order to prevent a government shutdown. Kim, what do you make, though, of this laddered approach, as it has been called? Normally, when Congress passes a continuing resolution, a spending extension, it is for the whole of the government. And Speaker Johnson has raised this idea of taking a laddered approach of having different deadlines for different pieces of the government. So at one point floated that maybe there could be 12 of them, as there are 12 appropriations bills. That's not what we ended up with. We have 2. So there's January 19 deadline, and then there's a February 2nd deadline. What do you make of that strategy?
First of all, just to agree with you, Kyle, that I think that there is some success going on here. And I would just name 2 things. One, it's crucial and so important that we do not look to be going down the road of these horrible omnibus appropriations process that we've been doing for year after year. Last year, the one that the Senate passed was 4,155 pages long and contained wholesale pieces of legislation that nobody had debated or amended on the floor. They just stuck in there. I mean, this is absolutely no way to govern. Also, I would just note from a personal, selfish point of view, we will not be all sitting around waiting over Thanksgiving and Christmas for the government to shut down. So yay, team. That was good too. But look, the laddered approach, it's also a bow to reality. What you have right now is that the House has passed 7 out of its 12 appropriations bills. It was set to pass another one this week, although interestingly, already in retribution for the Speaker's decision to hold this vote, a group of 19 further right Republicans opposed a rule just this morning to get the 8th of those bills onto the floor and out of the House, the Commerce, Justice, and Science bill. So we'll see how far they go in now playing havoc with the very appropriations process that gives Republicans some leverage. But the House has passed 7, the Senate has passed 3. And among the 4 that are going to be up on January 19th, which include the Ag Appropriations Bill, the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill, the Military Construction Bill, those are through the House and the Senate is farther along. So the idea is that you give them a shorter deadline because you want to keep the pressure on and you want to get those ones done that you can and show that they can be done. The other 8 are later, as you said, to February 2nd, gives a little bit more time. I would also note that packaged in those 8 are ones that Republicans and Democrats have traditionally used to play off each other. So, for instance, Democrats like to hold out on the defense bill because they know Republicans want a lot in there, and Republicans tend to hold out on the labor and health and human services bill because they know Democrats want a lot in there. So this is all set up to try to keep the dynamic going and the pressure going. One thing that I would note, it's hilarious to me. The press keeps writing about how the Senate's so much more on the same page and et cetera, and they're more unified. Yeah, they're unified in continued spending and in continuing to break the rules. The 3 bills that the Senate has passed, they passed all as a package. They couldn't even manage to break them out and pass them one-on-one. And they're already talking about packaging the other 9 as something that they're trying to call as something other than an omnibus. So I think all credit to the House for continuing to try to make this process work the way it is. And those deadlines are designed in part to blow apart that Senate laziness and just have them package everything together. By having 2 different deadlines, you're forcing the Senate to try to go through the appropriations process the way it's supposed to be done.